I'm a genius. I just spent about 10 minutes explaining today's lesson and realized I wasn't recording. So here we go, round 2. Welcome, traders. In this lesson, I'm going to be answering a question from a trader in the course who asked, and let me find the question again. This trader's question was, can you please make a lesson on how to plot the stop loss price and percentage on an indicator script? And they sent this screenshot as an example. You can see the script is detecting a entry and drawing the stop loss percentage and price onto the chart. So I've already done a lesson on how to draw your stops and targets onto the chart in PineScript. But in that lesson, I didn't show you how to draw dynamic information like this. So in today's lesson, we're going to expand on that previous lesson I just mentioned and add this functionality to that script. So for today's lesson, I'm going to be coming into the course in the indicators section down to displaying stops and targets. And I'm going to copy the code out from this first script. There are 2 scripts here. One shows all trade signals and one only shows one trade at a time. To keep today's lesson simple, I'm going to stick with the one trade at a time so that our chart isn't cluttered with multiple setups all over the place. So this script here will only draw your stops and targets until one of them is hit. So once it detects a setup, it will draw your stops and targets until price action touches your stop loss or your take profit. The other version will draw all setups. So if you get multiple setups in a row and you want to see all of those setups drawn onto the chart, use the second script here as your base. But for today, I'm sticking with the top one. For some reason, I published it as a strategy, but it's technically an indicator script as it doesn't contain any strategy code. You could easily add it to it if you wanted to. I'm not sure why I did that, but anyway, I'm going to copy the source code out and I'm going to paste it into my Pine editor here. Save the script. And here we are. So the first thing I'm going to do is change this back to an indicator script. Save the code. That should work just fine. There we go. The second thing I'm going to do is update my library to version 5. Zen library is now updated to version 5 is the latest version. If you want to learn about what changes I made to the script, they're in the Zen library section of the course. But today we're just focusing on today's lesson, which is adding stop loss percentage amount and prices onto our chart visually. Now the problem we're going to have here is you can see I'm drawing labels already that say short or long in the case of a long trade. And it's been a while since we had a long trade in crypto, but here's an example of one. The problem we have with this approach of using, where is it here? The text parameter is that this text parameter on our shapes needs to be a static string. It can't change. It needs to be basically hard coded. So for example, if I was to try to add the closing price on the end of this text parameter and save my code, I'll get an error here that says cannot call plot shape with blah, blah, blah. The important part here says an argument of series string type was used, but a constant string is expected. So a constant string is a string that never changes. This, on the other hand, is a string that changes. It will change on every single time it displays because it's adding dynamic data to the string, in this case, the closing price. We can't do that with our text parameter of the plot shape function for whatever reason. Pine doesn't allow us to do that. So instead, one way we can do this is using labels. And that's the approach I'm going to take today. So to add labels onto our chart, we're going to need a little bit more information. So the first thing I'll do here is I'll say calculate stop loss percentage and draw labels. So if you want to know what the rest of this code does, make sure to go back and watch the stop loss and targets lesson. It's very relevant and important to this lesson if you haven't watched that. But for today, I'm going to skip all of this code and we're just going to add on this new functionality of drawing our stops as text. So to do that, first we need to calculate our percentage distance for our stop loss. So in the case of this trade here, we're looking at about 17.9% would be our stop loss distance. So to calculate that, the easiest way with this particular script that I'm working with is just to use the math.abs function. This is absolute, and all it means is it will always give me a positive number. So in this case, it's a short trade. So our stop loss is positive, but in the case of a long trade, our stop loss would be negative. So from our entry of our long trade down to our stop loss is negative 22% on this trade. The math.abs function would convert that negative 22 into just a positive 22. So for this particular use case, we want that. We want all of our percentages to be in a positive number. It just makes it easy to read. So for this, to do this, we need to calculate the distance from our entry price, which in this case is the closing price of our setup candle. Obviously, you enter on the next bar's open if you're operating on a closing bar basis. But for the script, when it executes on the final tick of our setup bar, we want to calculate from that closing price to our stop loss value. If you wanted to calculate from the open price, all you need to do is check if you had a setup on the previous bar and then use the current bar's data. So if you had a valid long or short setup on the previous bar, that would mean that we're now operating on the open bar, the bar that we would execute our trade on, and you'd want to reference that bar's data after a setup is confirmed. But anyway, that's a subject for a different video. For today, we're working with the closing price. We've calculated the distance from our entry to our stop as a positive number, absolute value. We need to divide that by the entry price, in this case, the closing price, and simply multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. So that's the hard part out of the way. We're now calculating our percentage stop loss distance. All that's left to do now is convert this into text and then draw it. So I'm going to create a new variable here called stop label text. I'll indent this to make it a little easier to read, a little easier on the eyes. So for this, I'm just going to say SL equals plus, to add on to this string, we want to add on our percentage stop loss number. But remember, to add numbers to strings in PyScript, we need to use the str, which is obviously short for string. The string library or namespace, whatever you want to call it. If we hit Control space, here's a list of all the functions that deal with text or strings. In our case, we want to, what do we want to do? To convert the number to a string. So we need to say str.toString % stop loss. And that will give us our stop loss as a string. Now, to make it easy to read, I'm also going to add on the percentage sign. So we know that this number is a percentage. And then in brackets, I'm just going to add on str.toString our trade stop price. And then close off that parentheses in our string. So this will draw stop loss equals and then the percentage. And then in brackets, we'll have our actual stop loss price. So now, final thing to do is draw the long stop loss label and draw the short stop loss label. I'll just call my long stop loss label long stop label to be really creative. And then for this variable, there's multiple ways we can do this. The way I personally like to do this is just using a ternary operator, the question mark operator. And all I do here is I check, do we have a valid long setup? If so, then I want to create a new label. Otherwise, I want to do nothing. So if we have a valid long stop label will be set to a new label, which will generate a new label object on the chart. Otherwise, if we do not have a valid long setup, we set long stop label to NA. I can do the same thing for our short, valid short. And this is the building blocks for our label. The next thing we do, obviously, is add our parameters to the label. So to create a new label, the first thing we need to do is tell it which bar to draw it on. So we can just simply use the bar index. You can also use time, I believe. But I usually just stick with bar index as that's really simple. The next thing we need to do is tell it where on the y-axis, on the price scale, to draw our label. So we could just simply attach it to the high or the low of our setups in the case of a long trade if we wanted to. But for me personally, what I like to do is take our stop loss price, this red line, and in the case of a long stop label, I want to subtract the symbol's minimum tick value multiplied by 20. So this will give me a 2 pip distance from my red line. And you can make this as big or as small as you want. This is completely optional. I just like to do this because it draws it a little bit away from the red line. The next thing we need to do is specify our label text. So because I'm putting all these parameters in order as they appear in this syntax list, we have X, Y, text, X lock, Y lock, etc. Because these first three parameters are in order, I don't need to say text equals blah, blah, blah. I can just simply put the text value straight in. So I can just say stop label text. And now I will, because we're not specifying X lock and Y lock, I need to now specify the parameter we're working with. So in this case, I'm going to set the color to green. I'll set the text color to color.white. I'll set the style. And in fact, let me see if I can break this onto multiple lines. Will this work? I'll get rid of that. Yeah, it appears this is going to work. So the next thing, we've set our label color to green, our text color to white. Our style is going to be label.style underscore label up. And the size I'll set to size.small, but that is optional. And if I comment out this for a moment, save our code, we should now be getting long trade labels. There we go. Drawing onto the chart with our percentage, distance, and our price. And for some reason, I don't know why, but TradingView in PineScript loves to add on a billion decimal places to these numbers, even though there's only 4 decimal places on my price scale. I have no idea why it does this. It does this on most markets I've found. So what I did is in my Zen library, again, if you want to know how it works, go into the lessons relevant to the Zen library. But I created a function that we can use really easily to truncate these decimal places, or in other words, cut off all of these decimal places. So we only get 2, or in this case 4 for our price, and 2 decimal places for our percentage amount. So to use that function, since I've already imported my Zen library as Zen, this is the alias for my library, I can say here, percent stop loss, where we convert it to a string, I can write out here Zen dot control space truncate. And then I can put parentheses around that number. By default, this function will truncate or cut this number down to 2 decimal places. So I don't need to specify the decimal places parameter here, but on our stop loss price, I do want that. So I'll show you what I mean. If I copy this over here, so we're truncating both our percentage number, this long number here, the percentage, and our price number. If I save my code, keep an eye on the stop loss percentage. That is now 2 decimal places, but so is our price. And we don't want our price to be 2 decimal places because then it's quite inaccurate. With the percentage amount, not such a big deal. With the price amount, it is a big deal. So what I need to do here is specify how many decimal places to truncate this price value to. I could just put 4 in here and save the script. And now we'll be getting our number rounded down to the correct price value. But a better way to do this is to use the second relevant library function I created here called getDecimals. And getDecimals will return how many decimal places are in the price quote. So now when I save my code, this will do exactly the same thing. But if we were to load up a market with a different amount of decimal places, it will still work on that as well. And that's really it. We're basically done here. To make this easier to read, I'm going to put all of these onto new lines. Maybe that makes it easier to read. I don't know. If you're relatively new to Pine, this is probably very confusing. But again, just go through the course material. All of this will start to make sense over time. This is quite an advanced subject here that we're covering in terms of coding techniques in Pine, or at least an intermediate thing we're doing. Now see that we're drawing our long label underneath this second label. I don't really like the look of that. So for today's lesson, I'm going to get rid of our text titles there, or text parameters there. And that should get rid of the text. There we go. So now we know green labels pointing up mean a long trade. Red labels pointing down are going to mean a short trade. And all that's left to do is do everything we just did, but for short trades. So if I paste that on there, we're good to go. All I need to do here is change this to a plus sign since we want to add our minimum tick value to our stop loss line. We want it above, not below. In the case of a long trade, we do want it below. And I think that's it. If we save our code, we should be getting 2. Oh, obviously, I need to change this to red as well, and this to label down. But now, if I save my code, this should look a little less confusing. There we go. We have green labels, percentage, distance, price value, and then for short trades, the same thing. So if I draw that out, it's about 13%. That's what we have on our label. Perfect. So that's it, really. All that's left to do is to format this label how you prefer. Now, I've already done a lesson on labels in the early section of the course, so go and check that out if you want more information on how to format your labels. One thing I will do here, since we're on crypto and crypto doesn't work in pips the same way Forex does, this label's a bit closer to the line than I prefer. So I'm going to increase my minimum tick amount by 200 points. Save that code. And this label should now move a little bit higher, maybe. There we go. So now when you zoom out, it's a little bit easier to read that label distance. And you can see that price action is drawing over the top of our labels. To fix that, just click on these little 3 buttons here and click visual order, bring to front. Now your script will draw over price action if you prefer that. Anyway, that's it for today's lesson. Quite a simple one. Again, if you want to change your labels, for example, maybe you don't want a background color at all. For that, I think you can use transparency. So let's try color.black with 100% transparency. Save my code. There we go. So now we don't have a label. We just have the text drawing, which is more similar to the screenshot example that this trader sent. If you prefer that, you can do that. Otherwise, I'll leave this version, the source code to this version below the video for you to play around with. And that is the end of today's lesson. I'll call this part 2, and that will do. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting and useful in your trading. Good luck with your trading, and I'll speak with you, you guessed it, in the next lesson. Take care.